I'm going to be talking to you today about something close to home. In fact, so close, it's happening only an hour away from this campus. That'll be the Caribbean farm workers in the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program. I'm going to refer to that program as SOP for the remainder of my paper. I've been an activist for the past 7 years in the Niagara region, working very closely with these men and women. SOP is a branch that falls under the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, which is managed within several tiers of the federal and provincial governments, right down to municipal levels. So this makes the program very, very difficult to regulate. Jamaica was the first participating country, followed by Mexico and other Caribbean countries. At present, there are 30,000 men and women in the SOP program across Canada. 18,000 of them are working in Ontario. I interviewed 25 men for this paper, and this will reflect some of the male workers' stories regarding their feelings of the program. The issues that face the Mexican and female workers are so uniquely challenging that time does not permit me to talk about that today. To give a very, very brief background of a very complex program, the program was an attempt to solve the labor shortage in the area of agricultural farm work. The labor shortage in agriculture has been embedded in terms of reliability and suitability, but there is no Canadian shortage of low-skilled, suitable workers, but rather even unemployed Canadians refuse to work in agriculture because of low wages and such difficult working conditions. But rather than attempt to correct these problems that would attract Canadian workers, the government is rapidly expanding the temporary foreign worker programs. Under the Conservative government, it has expanded even more. For example, in 2006, there were 160,000 foreign workers in Canada. By 2010, that number has grown to 283,000. What is more disturbing is the very recent implementation of a new program for agricultural workers called the Agricultural Stream Pilot Project. This project is expediting employer requests for workers online with responses usually within a 5-day period. Foreign governments are not involved in the recruitment or the regulation of the workers' rights while in Canada. But in my recent conversation with a government official in the Temp Foreign Worker Program, he has stated that, I quote, currently Caribbean government officials are actively seeking out employers to hire Caribbean workers. So in other words, the Caribbean government has a job that's on commission, and they're selling or renting out human beings, which is now being defined as managed migration. This program allows employers to seek workers from any country in the world, and this project is a direct link between employer and worker, which is very unusual compared to SOP, with no connection with ascending government countries. It's a big, big, big problem. Even though the project states that wages must meet provincial regulations, agricultural workers are not covered under the Employment Standards Act in Ontario, and these employment contracts allow the employer and the worker to agree on hours of work, sick days, days off, break times. So the worker has no guarantee of hours, no overtime pay, or regulated days off. This is so problematic because many of these workers do not speak English, are illiterate, and have no idea what labor practices are legal or illegal in Ontario, but they're expected to sign an employment contract. Tell me, what do you think is going to happen if a worker from Guatemala arrives in Simcoe County, doesn't speak English, can't read the signs, doesn't know where to go for help if he's not being paid or finds himself in an abusive situation? What is this worker going to do? Excuse me. There is no infrastructure in place to assist these workers once in Canada. Well, how can there be when you've now got workers from every country in the world coming into very small agricultural towns? As an example, I saw a worker from Thailand in my grocery store, went over to introduce myself, and he was just standing there, just staring blankly. He could barely speak 2 words of English. I tried to ask him where he worked, in Spanish, in French. I did sign language because I don't know Thai, and all he could do was just point down the street. Well, this is just so ridiculous, and I shudder to think what would happen to this worker if he was ever in an emergency health situation, because this worker couldn't even locate a can of peas in a grocery store. I can't seem to get the words of Kevin Bales out of my head when he said, "How does slavery exist in 2011? It's easy, 3 words. Want a job? For the first time in Canadian history, we've got more temporary foreign workers coming into Canada than permanent immigrants. Well, why are there so many? Well, Stephen Harper's response is, we have people coming who have jobs waiting for them, and they almost invariably settle here. Well, Mr. Harper, that is not true. Low-skilled temporary workers cannot apply for permanent residence through the federal immigration system unless approved by the province where they are working. Furthermore, provinces can nominate migrant workers for landed status, but most reserve that privilege for high-skilled workers and other temporary worker programs. Yes, there is a provincial nominee program, but migrant workers must be sponsored by employers, and because of the vast expansion to these programs, there's no need for an employer to sponsor any particular individual because of the massive labor pool that's now at the employer's disposal. So yes, Canada will welcome the migrant workers in to do work, but based on their restricted work permits, they will have to leave when that work is done. If they don't, Immigration and Border Services are notified immediately. While historically Canada's labour shortage were solved by using Canadian citizenship as an enticement to attract workers from European countries, these workers had contracts for 1 to 3 years, but then the workers had mobility within the labour market, and they couldn't be relied upon to remain in agricultural jobs. So how do we solve that problem? Or how does the government solve that problem? Should we bring in workers from the Caribbean? Well, in 1966, the Assistant Deputy Minister had concerns about Caribbean workers and their impact on the racial demographic of Canada. He noted, and I quote, "It should be mentioned that one of the policy factors was a concern over the long-range wisdom of a substantial increase in Negro immigration to Canada." Well, I don't know about you, but when is it okay that the words long-range wisdom ever be connected to a sentence involving racist immigration policies? But the question remained, how does the government prevent the same problems that occurred with prior countries leaving agricultural work? What they had to do was deny workers mobility, restrict their work permits in Canada to 8 months, name them to one employer only, deny their families visitation, use discriminatory hiring practice that favors married men with children or single mothers to avoid flight risks, and deny them citizenship. These restrictions to workers were based or grounded in early racist immigration policies. The SOP program is so inherently racist and classist that it is deliberately and carefully constructed a labor program consisting of the most marginalized group of people that are identified as necessary and suitable, but at the same time not necessarily be suitable enough to be a Canadian citizen. So employers now have 100% controlled, immobile, unfree workforce, hence the implementation of the Seasonal Agriculture Workers Program. Well, what must it be like to be unfree? In my experience with the workers, many have referred to it as slavery or hell on earth. Workers have continuously said that the ever-present threat of repatriation is the biggest problem keeping them unfree. Repatriation means that the employer can send home any worker for non-compliance, refusal to work, or any other sufficient reason deemed by that employer, with no process of appeal by the worker. The fear of repatriation and its very vague definition of what is any other sufficient reason to send a worker home opens the door to potential misuse and abuse of power that can allow employers to threaten, intimidate, humiliate, and force these men to work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. You might ask, how can an employer get away with forced labor? I mean, the workers must have some rights, don't they? Some, but very, very limited. They're now covered under Occupational Health and Safety Act, which states that they can refuse to work, but their workers' employment contract with their sending governments and Canadian governments states that refusal to work is a reason for repatriation. So this is so extremely problematic because of the workers' paralyzing fear of repatriation. Few will ever complain or refuse work. In fact, one of the workers I know quite well is working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week from March till October with not one day off. Furthermore, after the 12-hour shift, his employer has him performing lawn care, weeding, leaf collection at his employer's private personal home, working into the night with a flashlight. His employer's private home sits on 5 acres. I ask the worker why he does this. He replies, I have to. I have no choice. I want to keep my job. Well, isn't there someone in the program that monitors and regulates and protects these workers from exploitation? Well, the Caribbean workers have a liaison officer through the consulate who is supposed to act on behalf of the workers, but this role is also problematic because the liaison has a dual role. She or he is also there to ensure Canadian employers continue to hire Jamaican workers. This program is so competitive between participating countries, and employers are able to specify the nationality, gender, and even specific names of workers they wish to hire. The liaison is sort of like the sales manager on commission, like I said before, who has employees, but she must also answer to the Jamaican Ministry of Labor. So when a worker has a complaint, the liaison will always side with the employer. A liaison once said, "You know how I control my workers? I'm in charge. I make them work and I keep them working. I don't lose my farms to any other country." Another liaison said to a worker who was questioning her, "You're getting just too smart for your own damn good." To keep the workers under control, they must also reduce the workers' access to information. Currently, the liaison and/or the employers are withholding personal work documents that the men are legally entitled to under federal law. Yes, this is illegal, but if the workers don't even know these documents exist or what they are, then naturally it only allows that cycle of control to continue. When I called Service Canada to complain about employers not giving out record of employments, because the Met had never received them since 1966, the man asked, "Which employer?" I said, "How much time do you have? Because I have a list of over 500 farms just in the Niagara region, and did his fax machine have enough paper in it?" I called the International Tax Services of the CRA to complain that Jamaican workers have never seen or even heard of what a T4 or a copy of a prepared tax return since 1966, and she screamed at me and said that this was none of my business, and she quickly hung up on me. Well, it is my business how human beings are treated in Canada, and that's the reason I am an activist. There's a saying that goes, "Those who have the privilege to know have the duty to act." So as an activist, I became acutely aware of the all-encompassing needs of these workers that go far beyond just their workday. When I first began visiting the farms, I thought I'd be just talking about labor rights, but I began to notice a pattern. After I spoke to the group, each man would pull me aside and ask to speak to me in private. Their concerns were nothing about work. They were all about family separation, clinical major depression, marital problems, and continuous questions about citizenship. Every worker voiced that they were being used by Canada and they should have the right to apply for residency. One man said, "Why are we good enough to work here, but we're not good enough to live here? I've worked here 22 years. My wife left me because I'm never home. I barely know who my kids are. I've given my entire life to this country. This isn't fair." No, it's not fair. In this program, you cannot separate labor from the human experience. They are intrinsically linked because these men are living here 24/7 for 8 months of the year. So we can't just change their problems at work. We have to look at an integrative approach that will change their entire lives. So how do we improve the lives of these workers while they're in Canada? A union, maybe? Well, after the devastating blow to the union's appeal last year denying the right to collective bargaining, I think we have to look outside the box even if and when a union is ever implemented. I'm a huge supporter of unions, yet we need to look at a solution that will integrate the whole entire person. Could a union obtain a better wage, overtime pay, or stat pay? Of course they could. Is the union able to address the all-encompassing needs of these workers after they clock out at 8 p.m.? No, and this isn't a union's job either. This is where major structural and legislative changes must be addressed within the federal program. Without residency, no matter how great a union contract, the contract cannot stop the staggering depression of a worker who is separated from their family for 8 months of the year, and they can't stop a child from forgetting who that father is when he returns home. While obviously gaining rights and job protection are crucial under the current conditions, I feel without residency, job protection is a necessary Band-Aid in a program that requires reconstructive surgery. Based on my direct experience with the workers, much work needs to be done on the integration of workers into their Canadian communities. Locals don't feel the need or desire to develop any relationship with strangers when they know that it's transitory. A worker commented that most locals won't give them the time of day. He went on to say, "It's probably because white people are suspicious and afraid of me because I'm black. It makes me mad when all the kids in town call me nigger, but I can't say anything to him." I asked him why. If I talk back to a white person, they could tell my boss and I'm going to be sent home, so I just have to keep quiet and keep my head down. When I asked a worker how it feels to return to the program for his 12th year, he says, "I have to start to zone out a week or so before I leave Jamaica. I kind of go numb. I don't want to feel anything. When I'm driving to the airport, I want to turn back. No one talks on the plane to Toronto. The plane is dead and my heart is crying." I asked another worker why he joined the program. He said, "My dad couldn't afford to send us kids to school. My dad was in the program, so he got me in. I was just 18. I never even thought of what the work would be like. I was so stupid, because now I'm here, but I can't go anywhere. I'm trapped in a place where they won't have me. I hate it. Dad left the program here, you know, because he got real sick on the job." Well, this worker's story is very interesting to note because it represents a huge problem within this program, and that is workplace injury and illness and the deliberate lack of reporting on behalf of some employers and some doctors. When you add the dynamic of a son that's currently working in the program, you'll see how these unreported injuries have far-reaching implications on their entire family. The worker phoned me the other day and said he's really fighting with his dad back in Jamaica. He said his dad is threatening to leave the family. His dad got really sick working with pesticides on the farms in Canada for 25 years. He was hospitalized in Canada, but the farmer sent him home with no compensation. The dad is yelling at him now, saying that the son should take over as the sole provider for the entire family. His dad has gone on a rampage, kicked his eldest daughter out, and stopped paying for her schooling. So the worker tells me he is now paying for his sister's tuition, but he can't afford it. He said, "I need money to take care of my own young son, so I want to make sure he never has to come up here and work in the program." I asked him what he thought he was going to do. He said, "I have to ask God for help." Well, what about the liaison? Isn't it her job to help the workers? Well, we shall see. There was one case of an injured worker who was so severely ill and hospitalized, and he would die if he had returned to Jamaica without health care. The Jamaican consulate found out that several advocacy groups were involved trying to keep this worker remaining in Canada. The worker's son, who's also in the program, called me at 4 a.m. screaming that the liaison service were rifling through his father's personal items trying to find his dad's passport to send him home. The son was screaming at me, he's going, "Please go to the hospital now. They're trying to send him home. They're on their way to the hospital. Please go, help my dad." I asked him if they had his dad's passport. He said no, they couldn't find it. The son told me he had hid his dad's passport down his pants when he heard the liaison coming. Just the other day, a worker told me his supervisor said, "I know I have to work with you guys, but I have to admit, I'm afraid of you black guys." Many employers have told their workers that visitors are not allowed at their farmhouse for the entire season, which is 8 months. The men have told me that the boss actually means white people. Of course, I don't listen to farmers, and went to visit a farm I'd never been to before, and a worker there told me that I was the first white person to visit his farm in the last 18 years he's been in Canada. He said, "I thought Canadians had forgotten about us." Unfortunately, employers denying visitors isn't unusual, so I'm now doing covert operations behind arenas. It's better than being chased off farms by employers' dogs or employers running after me with baseball bats in hand, which has happened to me more than once, so I now welcome the safety of a dark arena parking lot. A few weeks ago, I was in the local health clinic and I heard a boss call his worker, "boy." He says, "Come here, boy. Why are you taking so long, boy?" The worker walked really slow with his head hung low. He said he can't complain, but he gets so mad. I asked him how he deals with his anger. He said, my anger goes to my brain. My head feels real full. Nights are the worst. I pull the sheet down beside my bunk and I call my wife. I want to cry, but I can't worry her. I don't care if I sleep at all. I just want to hear her voice on the phone. When she hangs up, it's like I'm back in hell again. Am I okay? I'm done? Okay, well, hold on. Okay. Okay. The workers might not come forward, but they sure as hell pay it forward. Their work might not be suitable or insurable, but the worker is not. So when these men leave work each season, they don't get to collect EI, even though they pay into it their entire working lives. Migrant workers pay approximately $15 million or more in EI contributions each year to the government. So now we've got the non-Canadian worker subsidizing the Canadian non-worker. One worker said, we leave our families to feed Canadian families and we get nothing. I want my EI money back. Canada's using us like we're slaves. I believe they are modern day slaves. I'm with these workers and I can feel, taste, and smell their fear. Is this Canada, the glorious and the free? When a worker is held up against the wall with his supervisor's hands around his throat, is that free? When that same worker has the unbelievable courage to complain and then is coincidentally sent home the next day, is that free? Is this Canada, we stand on guard for thee? You're damn right. If you're a migrant worker, they'll be standing on guard for thee at the border. In order for Canadian families to eat, the government decided we must do so on the backs of the most vulnerable and marginalized. They call it suitability and reliability. I call it racist and classist. Let's call a spade a spade. The reason I'm here today alone illustrates the argument of my paper. I invited a worker to attend the conference with me today, and his employer wouldn't give him the day off. He hasn't had a day off since March. This worker had the courage to attend a conference, and he was planning on participating in the Q&A, which is the most courageous step for a worker to take, and yet he was denied that day. The worker was very disappointed, but he said he just wanted to keep his job. So what does this say about the employer? It's not just about good or bad employers, it's about the structural elements of a program that allows this exploitation and discrimination to manifest within itself. Meaning if the work is not valued, the worker's not valued, more so that human being is not valued. So family values and the importance of investing in family are often planks in Canadian political platforms. But I guess they only mean Canadian families because these racist immigration policies dispose of Jamaican families. Canada doesn't invest in them. They use them. They rent them. They spit them out after 20 years and bring in the next worker in line. Shame on you, Canada. Thank you.